And then how do you gather the groundwater afterwards? I think the dry pond, actually design the underneath of the house as collectors if need be, and then a way to stage release it.
They actually do act as collectors, unfortunately. That's what happens to the water when it goes in your basement.
Yes.
I think we should sound flippant, but...
No, a pillared house doesn't have,
Right.
so.
And maybe, I don't know how acceptable that is here in the bowl, but if you look at some of the response to Hurricane Sandy on the east coast of the United States, the raising of coastal homes and is one of the things that FEMA and other agencies are looking at as a standard practice. So, I mean, I think we're in a position now where no ideas are off the table, but at the time we get to making decisions and we want to figure out what fits best. And I should say, you will see me get up and leave soon. My wife's plane just landed. I promised her I'd pick her up at the airport. I'm not dodging questions.
I think some of this also comes into the idea around land use and bylaws and planning. So this is, do we look at when you live close to the river, perhaps the building envelope changes. Maybe you're not allowed to build farther down into the bed, maybe your basement's not X deep, and maybe you're allowed to build a little bit higher. And I think those are some things that the city has been talking about around, we've kind of got a bit of a one size fits all, is my understanding, but we might be able to make some changes that will help us in the future.
So my question is, maybe the experts on the panel, maybe each of them have a different opinion. Had the Groeneveld report been implemented in its fullest, and had there been time enough to implement it in its fullest, would it have had a material effect on the flood?
This may sound like dodging the bullet, but I'm honestly not familiar with what is in the Groeneveld report.
It wasn't really that big. Like, let's be clear about that. I think there's sort of this fantasy out there that there was this 500-page report. I think when I looked at it, it was like 23 pages. So I don't think it actually went nearly to the degree that we probably should have gone to, but we can't look back. We have to look forward now, and we have to, in my opinion, no. But it's part of, there's stuff in there that needs to come forward and that we're looking at now, but actually needs to be extrapolated probably tenfold. I don't know.
I generally agree with Emma. I don't think it would have made a big difference for this last flood because it was only written in 2006. It discourages further development on the floodplain. It encourages flood proofing, which the province now wants to do, and so on and so forth. And the amount of new development on the floodplain since 2006 is not huge compared to the development over the last several decades. So I think the Groeneveld report mainly looks to the future. If we stick to business as usual like it's been over the 20th century, then the problem's going to get progressively worse as population continues to increase. So I think the Groeneveld report is looking to the future of our development.
I've got a financial question that I don't know if any of the panel members really have the wherewithal to answer, but it does impact the flooding in the future. This particular flood, the government came out and said they were going to financially assist many of the people that were in the flood zone. However, we all know that there are many people that were in what we call fringe, which I don't want to be insulting, but a 10-year-old could have seen that they were impacted. And yet, many of these people, by the government words, are not going to be assisted financially, and yet they were devastated, mostly in the High River area. The fairness of the finances that have been, are still going out, I have found, are totally not fair. Like I said, a 10-year-old could have seen who needed help and who still needs help. So what's going to be done about that? in the present and perhaps in the future. Not that I agree that we should be helping people in the first place, because if it's an individual decision to build somewhere, again, in the vernacular and being very straightforward, you better stand by your own actions and be responsible for yourself and not expect the rest of the world to pay for you. But if there's going to be a fairness, why can't we pay all of those people that were impacted and not leave those out that are supposedly in a fringe?
Okay. I'm not sure how many people are not actually getting disaster relief funding who qualify for it. Those who are in flood fringe do qualify for DRP funding. In fact, even if you're not in the flood fringe and your home was damaged by the flood, you do qualify for disaster relief funding, is my understanding. And I've been asked this question many times from people who email to us, and we go back to Andre Corval, and we go back to the people who are doing it. I think there was a community in High River, specifically, perhaps the counselor from High River could speak to that, which was not in the floodway. And I think a number of homes were severely damaged there, which then didn't qualify for the buyout. So there's disaster relief funding, and then there's the buyout. So the buyout program is a program whereby if your dwelling is in the floodway, the government is trying to clear the floodway, and so they will pay you your 2012 property assessment. In terms of the funding that you get for disaster relief program, I believe it's $126 a square foot for your main level, and then it's $36 a square foot, I think it is, for your basement. I might be off by $1 or $2 there. So those are the amounts that people are qualifying for. I don't know if people are not being funded. In terms of sort of the overall question about, you know, the individual homeowner choosing to build in the floodway. You know, these are policy decisions that we've been making in Calgary since, 1904. My house is a 1912 house. The community that we live in, again, Calgary was, founded at the confluence of the Bow and the Obo River. These are areas that have been developed, and these are communities where people have been encouraged to develop. It's where there's a huge property tax base. It's really very similar to, the rest of the downtown core. Do we have to do something going forward? Yeah, but I really don't think it's fair to look at the individual homeowners who have bought in these communities that are well-established communities and to say, you're on your own. So, yeah, anyway.
This High River business is really interesting, and I think the community that Emma was referring to, Hidden Hills, is it, or Hidden Ridge? Hampton Hills. Apparently not on the floodplain according to the provincial mapping, and yet got heavily damaged. So that's really interesting to me to figure out what happened there, and I have no idea. But I'm sure this will come out, but it seems to be a case where the map doesn't work.
A lot of High River doesn't show as flood fringe or even overland flow that was affected by the flooding. To my knowledge, the biggest problem with DRP is they getting funding to the people that need it.
Yeah.
Probably still got 1,000 residences that aren't occupied. They don't have money to put furnaces in. Typically, those homes don't qualify for insurance because they've got main floor damage, structural damage in the trusses. So the insurance companies have essentially walked away from it, and it's the delay in getting cash in their hands that is the big issue. The DRP formula is pretty straightforward. It does exclude the rental properties just by the rules that are in the program. But as far as homeowners go, private homeowners that occupy their primary residence, I'm not aware of any exclusions that are an issue. It's really the timing of the cash flow. And it's similar in business.
This gentleman here, please.
I guess I have a small question, but maybe just spend a minute to share the experience that I had during the flood, because I think it may help in taking your planning in a new direction as well. I didn't evacuate because I'm right at the edge of the flood plain, and that there's a huge hill outside my door, so every time I felt in danger, I could always run for the hill. So I stayed, and I fought the flood. And we built very quickly, as soon as the groundwater arrived, we built very quickly some emergency sump pumping capability. The original sump pump in the house failed within minutes, and we just put in a whole lot more pumping capability. The result of it was that we accumulated in the basement at the worst of the flood. Typically, I was able to hold it to 1 inch of water across the basement slab. We did have an event where the main pump failed for about 90 minutes till I could repair it, during which time I accumulated about 5 inches in my basement. It's a newer home, so it's a much deeper basement than most other buildings. I did compare against basements up and down my street after the flood event was over, and I should have gotten about 4 feet of water in the basement. So I would like to put to the technical experts on the panel that I believe it is possible to create a depression in the groundwater underneath my building by pumping water off the weeping tile which surrounds the footing at a sufficient rate that I can actually prevent the basement from filling with water, and in fact extended some of that protection to adjacent houses as well, because their foundations weren't quite as deep as mine. So I'm picturing, and maybe this is for further investigation, that in fact, it just created a depression in the ground table that prevented that. I think what that means is that the assumption that you, in the flood event, that you simply have to walk away and evacuate and let it fill with water is not quite right. That in fact, with enough active pumping, you can prevent a flood event and significantly change the amount of damage possibly to zero. I've since upgraded it again, and the next flood of this magnitude will leave no water in the basement. I will be able to stay ahead of it. Now, that's a replicable solution. Other people can do the same, and my neighbors can do the same. We can actually create a little zone around the basements that's protected against groundwater intrusion. So I would like to suggest to your panel that some thought go into challenging the notion that you have to just walk away. But you can in fact combat it. You need power, you need generators, and you need some capability, but it can be done. So I'll stop there. I think it's worth noting that you don't necessarily have to fill out the water.
Yes, you did indeed create what's known as a cone of depression in the groundwater table, which you find anywhere where water is being pumped out of the ground. The groundwater table will depress. And so what you were able to keep your cone there quite successfully for the duration of flood event. As for the policy decision, evacuate or not, that's for none of us at this table to say, I'd say, but I would say, David's going to say something, but I would say municipal jurisdictions these days are very much into evacuation. They're very heavy into evacuation. They think that's the solution. So you'd have to change that culture, which is not a geology or hydrology or engineering culture. It's a civic administration kind of culture.
Just very briefly, speaking to the evacuation, we have an emergency response plan that covers the city of Calgary.